First school I attended was Fairmont Heights Elementary School. That was in Maryland. Uh, those are elementary through, I guess, third or fourth grade. Then I went to West Elementary School, um, which took me up to, I think, the sixth grade. Yeah. And that's when I had my first experience with both someone from a foreign country as well as my first school fight. First experience with someone from a foreign country, most of, both the neighborhood I grew up in was all black. And, but when I went to West Elementary, the first foreign student I ever met was from Japan. And in those days, you'd go to school and then you'd have a lunch break and everybody would be let out to play on the playground, either to play dodgeball or basketball or hopscotch or whatever it is. But there, as in most groups, there are always a bunch of little adventurous boys that like to pick on people. And there's a group of little boys that decided to pick on this Japanese kid in our school. But little did they know that he knew judo. And one of them made the mistake of trying to push him down or intimidate him. And I saw him lift him over his shoulder and flip him on the playground. So after that lesson was learned, they left him alone. Word spread rather quickly that this Japanese boy knew judo and not to bother him. So the second significant event was, as most schools do, some of them have bullies. And we had a school bully, and the school bully had a younger brother who happened to be in the same grade as my sister. And again, in the family tradition, it's my obligation to take care of and protect my younger sister. My sister got into an argument with the school bully's younger brother, and ended up saying that my brother will beat up your big brother. So, in those days, obviously, school let out at 3 o'clock. And after lunch, because I hadn't seen my sister all day long, she comes up to me like 5 minutes before 3 or at 3 o'clock saying, I got in an argument with the guy's name was Rodman, with Rodman's brother. And he said he was going to beat me up. And I said, I'm going to have my brother beat your brother up. So you have a fight at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So it ended up, he walked about a block away and we got into a fight. He was bigger than me, but I fought anyway. And fortunately, one of our neighbors pulled up in their car and stopped the fight. But that was very memorable. And I thank my sister for getting me in trouble like that. But that was my obligation to her. So the other school I went to, junior high school, from sixth grade, I think, to ninth grade was Gordon Junior High School. And in those days, we lived in an area called the Gold Coast, which was off of 16th and Colorado Avenue by Carter Barron Amphitheater, right across from Rock Creek Park. And we had to take the bus across town to Gordon Junior High School. And that Gordon Junior High School was in Georgetown, all the way across the other side of Washington, D.C. And we were actually either the first or second wave of black students to integrate that school. Before that, it was all white. So I went to Gordon Junior High School. It was mainly uneventful until I went to Western High School, which is also in Georgetown. And I went there from '63 and graduated in 1966. And when I was at Western, I was in a lot of activities. I was on the track team. I ran the 100-yard dash, the 220-yard relay. I was, in those days, they had high school cadets, which was military training. And you learned how to use a rifle, how to march, and they had a class in cadet training, which is pre-military training. So I advanced there. I went from sergeant to platoon sergeant to first sergeant, and then platoon company commander. I ended up being a captain of cadets. And I also joined, we had a drill team. So I participated in that as well. And I also played in high school football. On defense, I was a central linebacker, and offense, because I wasn't that big, I played right guard. So just to let you know now, I'm 5'8", I weigh 185 pounds. So then from there, because a lot of my other classmates decided after high school they wanted to go to college, I decided to go with them, and we all went to Howard University to undergraduate school. And college was new for me because of the freedoms that you had, that you didn't have restrictions in high school. You can come and go as you please, do what you want, either go to class or not go to class. And in my freshman year, I majored in, something in liberal arts. And I was with two of my high school classmates, and we clowned around so much that I did not study. And I flunked out of my freshman year at Howard. And I was disinvited to come back to Howard because my grades were so low. Fortunately, my father knew the dean of students and told me either I have to, and in those days it was during the Vietnam War, and you could get a student deferment if you were in college. Otherwise, you would be drafted what they call 1A, and you would be inducted into the Army. So I didn't want to go to the Vietnam War. And even though I had flunked out my first year, my father said, either you join the Army, get a job, or you go back to school where you can get a deferment. And I'll make arrangements to try to get you back in Howard, which I said, I want to go back to Howard. So he convinced one of his friends, who was the dean of students, to allow me to be conditionally accepted on probation to come to Howard. And that would be for a 1-year probationary period based upon my grades. And at that time, I was in liberal arts, but I loved to draw. When I was younger, I liked to put together model airplanes, model ships, model boats, model cars. And I just loved to, get the instructions and put the small pieces together and make these models, and I also loved to draw. But I figured that, being an artist, even though I like to draw, you couldn't make a living as an artist. And most artists didn't make any money until they were dead, like Van Gogh or Renoir or somebody like that. So I said, well, what can I do and do what I like doing, which is drawing? And I looked up and I found what architects do. So I said, well, I'm going to try to see if I can be an architect. And I applied for transfer from liberal arts to architecture. So I got conditionally accepted into the School of Architecture and Planning. That's what they called it at that time. And that's a 5-year undergraduate program. It had like 120 hours of scholastic studies. You have to take calculus, you have design studio, you have art classes, you have architectural history, you have a course called construction drawings. So it was very technical, which I liked. Um, it involved drawing, which I liked. And I found myself excelling, going from a F plus to D minus to B plus and A minus in all those courses. So I did very well during my 5 year uh, tenure at Howard University, and I got a bachelor's degree in architecture in 1972. Now, after that, and then shortly after that, I got married to my first wife, Maria, in 72. And we had a child named Kobe. His name was Kobe Brooks. And I said I didn't want to stop my education there. I wanted to get a master's degree because, in my mind, I figured, well, the more education you have, the possibility of making more money you could make. So I decided, I said, well, let me apply to graduate school. So I applied to, I said I wanted to, I'd already been to Howard, which is a very prestigious black school, but I wanted to see if I could polish that off and go to another prestigious school to get as much money as I thought I could earn. So I applied to UCLA, I applied to Yale, um, I applied to Penn State. I didn't get accepted to UCLA, didn't get accepted to Penn State, but I did get accepted to graduate school design at Harvard University. And they gave me a scholarship. So from there, I went to, left Washington, D.C., and majored in the Master of Architecture and Urban Design. Urban design is a design of not just one building, but whole communities, which I like doing. So I had a major in architecture at the master's level and a minor, especially in urban design and real estate development. And that's a 2 year program. So I graduated from Harvard in 1976 with a master's degree in architecture with a specialty in urban design. One of my most memorable academic experiences was when, as you may or may not know, in graduate school, you have to maintain a B average in every class. And if you don't, you can't get a degree. So even though I was on scholarship at Harvard, unfortunately, they gave me a full year scholarship the first year, but they withdrew it the second year. This was in the days when they were trying to integrate Harvard University and other Ivy League universities, and they were recruiting black students. But for some reason, I don't know why, my scholarship was withdrawn. I had a Pell Grant and a Pell Loan, but I didn't have enough to pay all my tuition. So I applied for a job as an architect working for what's called the Boston Model Cities program, which was like an urban league program. It was funding assistance to urban black neighborhoods, in this particular case in the Boston area. And I worked in the black section of Boston in the Model Cities program as an architect. So I was working full time. Now, Harvard had a philosophy that Harvard students don't work. They're just there for the academic experience. But I had to work full time because I had to pay tuition and I had to pay apartment rent to house my wife, who had transferred from her job as a librarian in Washington, D.C., and my son. So I had very little time. So I would be at my work uh, 8 hours a day, and then I would transfer and go to Harvard and take my courses. Now, I did very well in all my design courses, and there was one mandatory course that I will never forget that I had to pass, and that was an economics course. And because of my workload, I was able to do absolutely no studying in that course at all. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where it was do or die. Either I passed that course or I was going to fail out of Harvard because I hadn't studied for it. So in those days, you're supposed to, they give you a syllabus of books that you read while you're taking the course, and they have core textbooks that were highly in demand. And some of them they put on reserve because there were just more students that needed them than there were books available. So I reserved one of the core textbooks for the economics course that I had not studied for the entire semester. And that exam was the following morning. So that night, I went to what's called the Loeb Library at Harvard, got the reserve economics book, and I prayed that I would not fail out of Harvard because I knew all the sacrifices that my parents and my ancestors had made for me to get to this point. I was the most highest educated person in my family at the time. So I sat down and I read the entire economics book, took notes, read, and reread everything I could because I knew I had no option. I could not fail. So from time for the exam, because it's a mandatory core curriculum course, every student in the school had to take that course. That was the final, and you could only make one grade, B or better, in order to pass that course. So if you can imagine, I walked into, it's like an amphitheater lecture hall, and there must have been, I'd say at least 200 students in that lecture hall. And it's tiered, semicircular around a podium where the professor spoke and the blackboard behind him and all of that. And I had, just by way of background, I had not an argument, but a debate with the economics professor that was teaching that course. He was white. This is not being facetious, but his name was James Brown. I'll never forget that. And he was a redhead. He had red hair and he had a full red beard. And for some reason, in the middle of one of his lectures, he made the statement that there was no such thing as Black economics, and Black families and Black communities had no focus. They had no desire to do better, and they didn't know anything about economics. And I was the only Black student in the class. And because I was working in model cities, in the middle of what's called Roxbury, which is like the Harlem in New York of Boston, right in the middle of it, I stood up and challenged him, and this is unheard of, but I did. I said, "Professor Brown, you don't know what you're talking about. I work in Roxbury every day. I know I'm not supposed to be working every day, but I do. And I work on economic development projects that Black communities are working on every day, building new houses and expanding commercial areas to improve their neighborhoods." And I felt like there's an old commercial about investments. And they used to say, when E.F. Hutton says something, you listen. And I'm standing there lecturing back to the professor, and all the white students turn back and look at me as I'm lecturing him, then I said to myself, let me stop myself. I'm not here to teach them about Black economics. I'm here to learn from them. So I just stopped and sat down and let him finish his lecture. But that was like the preface to taking this exam. So I knew my relationship with him was not good. But at the beginning of the course, of the exam, in those days, they would give out a blank, what they call a blue book. And all it was a blue covered paper book with a lot of lines, and there was no information in it, that you had to write in the blue book what your answers were to each of the questions. And so I get your blue book, you put your name on the front of the blue book, and then the student assistants would hand out the actual exam in a separate handout. And those were already printed. Some of the questions were multiple choice. Some of the questions were essay. So after they give out the blue books, what I do is I said, let me not panic. Let me just read every question in the book, which I did front to back. And I said, I don't want to miss any questions. And lo and behold, I knew the answer to every question that they had. So I said, let me just take my time and answer every question. I knew the multiple choice. I did that. I saved the essays for last, and I took my time and answered it. I knew that exam so well that out of 300 students, I was the third person to finish the exam. I got up, I knew how to answer all those questions. I walked up, the professor was sitting at the desk as the students sat next to him collecting the blue books. And he was just there observing. And I leaned over to Professor Brown and I said, thank you for this course. I've learned a lot of economics from you. I appreciate it. And my grade on that exam was A-.